Let's see, good to see you. As we're waiting for people to arrive, why don't you introduce yourself in the chat? Um, you can let us know what farmers market are you with, and what's your biggest tip for reaching new communities with your market's promotional communications? We're just going to give it a few more minutes. Here comes some more people. People are just trickling in here now. So let me see one more person coming into the room. I'm gonna let them get here. Okay, hi to, oh, yeah. They're coming in faster now. Okay, hi everyone who's here. We're just introducing ourselves in the chat as we let everyone arrive. Please share, what farmers market are you with, and what's your biggest tip for reaching new communities with your market's promotional communications? I see another person on their way in. Just want to get, hi there, hi to those who just arrived. Thanks for being here. We're giving a minute or two to let people in, and we're introducing ourselves in the chat. What farmers market are you with? And what's your biggest tip for reaching new communities with your market's promotional communications? And as you all are introducing yourselves, I'll start to introduce us now. Hi, welcome. This webinar is being hosted by the Oregon Farmers Markets Association, or OFMA. OFMA supports farmers markets with training, networking, advocacy, funding, and promotion. We run workshops and peer learning circles every month, and there are lots of opportunities through OFMA to connect and find support from the statewide farmers market community. Happy to see this crowd gathering here. We've already started with introductions. Thank you for popping in the chat and saying hello. My name's Amanda Cross. I'm with OFMA and I'm here hosting this Zoom today. Also here, or will be here from OFMA, is Kendra Graves, who you'll be talking with through the chat window. And we want to welcome that your cameras can be on or off, whatever feels good to help you participate. And please do participate. Maybe try something new today in a way you haven't before. Type your thoughts in the chat or raise a hand to speak when we have Q&A. We also love to see use of emojis and reactions button to share a quick sense of how something landed for you or to give affirmation to what you've heard. Contributing in this way really means a lot to the speakers so that they can get some feedback and see your reactions. Yes, so now to introduce our speaker, Pamela Oakes is the owner of the Profitable Nonprofit. This is the fourth webinar in a quarterly series of fundraising-focused workshops that she's led for Oregon markets. Recordings of all our past webinars with Pamela are in our YouTube library. Please go check those out if you missed any of those sessions. In today's final webinar, we're going to re-examine and reimagine nonprofit fundraising practices through an equity lens, and we'll explore shifting our fundraising activities in ways that help to build community and further social justice. So, hello, Pamela. Please introduce yourself. Let's get started. I'll get your slides up here in just a second.
Yes, great. Well, welcome everybody. So glad that you are here. Yes, I am Pamela Oakes. As she said, the owner of the Profitable Nonprofit. For those of you who weren't at our previous ones, I'll give a brief introduction for myself. I have always been in nonprofits. That has been my career choice. You can scroll to the next screen, Amanda, there. I've always been in nonprofits. That has been my career choice. I was started out doing like some short-term humanitarian projects, both domestically and overseas. Did that for a few years, and then an opportunity came up for me to actually move to Johannesburg, South Africa. This was right after Nelson Mandela got out of jail, so there was a new constitution in the country and a new way of thinking once apartheid had been banned. And so that's really how I cut my teeth on consulting. I was consulting with the top 100 companies in South Africa in the areas of employment equity, gender equity, inclusion, diversity, affirmative action, all those equities that didn't exist under apartheid. So I was in South Africa for about 3 years. And it was during that time that I really started hearing about the work of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, I'm from Seattle, so I obviously knew who Bill Gates was, but the foundation had a very small footprint at that time. So I always think it's funny. I learned more about them living in Africa than I ever did living in their own backyard. But I thought when I go back home to Seattle, I would love to work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's what I did, came back, ended up working for them. Now I'm a grant maker. I'm one of those people that says, yes, we will fund your nonprofit, or no, we're not going to fund your nonprofit. And why? And the why was very eye-opening to me because I realized there was a real disconnect between this hoard of wealth that we were sitting on top of, as well as other foundations and funders across the country, and the communities and the organizations that actually needed that wealth. And they weren't talking to each other. It was this closed, like this curtain was drawn between who has the money and how do you get the money. So I started consulting part-time while I was working full-time to really help empower community organizations, specifically organizations serving people of color or organizations led by people of color, because they seem definitely at the bottom of receiving funds, and helping them to understand what does it take to get on the radar of a major funder? What does it take to qualify for that funding? And most importantly, how do you even find funding for your initiative? So I did that part-time for almost 2 years, and then my little side hustle outgrew my full-time gig. So I had been at the Gates Foundation for almost a decade, about 10 years. And so I decided to take the leap and do the consulting full-time. So here I am, 8 years later, still doing it, working as a full-time fund development and capacity enhancement consultant. And very happy to be a part of presenting these trainings for the Oregon Farmers Market Association. As Amanda said, this is our fourth one. As a quick recap, the first one was all about storytelling. That is so significant. Do not try to fundraise until you refine and perfect your story. It sets the foundation for a successful fundraising campaign. What fundraising is supposed to do is not just present facts and figures. It is intended to inspire and motivate the hearers so that they want to give. So storytelling is number one. It creates you want to inspire people that your cause, your mission is worthwhile and worth supporting. The second thing was diversifying revenue. That is becoming even more relevant in right today, as of January, because of all the political changes that are happening. There are many, many, many different ways to fund a nonprofit. Grants are only one way. And when grants are plentiful, people don't really think about all those other ways of funding a nonprofit. But we delved into all those other ways of funding a nonprofit, whether it's corporate, earned income, your special events or whatever that is. There are many ways to fund a nonprofit, and the largest sources are, other than grants, are corporate, for-profit companies and individuals. So if you are not actively and proactively expanding your support base of individuals, you are missing out on a huge portion. And then the last session we did was on donor engagement. Again, it's you don't want to have approach donors right before you need money. You want to keep them engaged and interested in what you're doing so that when you need money, they're already engaged. They're already got your back. They're already in your corner. But what happens is, oh, the fundraiser's in 3 weeks. Let's go out and talk to people and ask for money. that is a real hard sell and it doesn't work well. It's best to just actively and proactively keep your community, keep your donor base engaged so that when it comes time to ask for money, you don't have to ramp up or start from scratch. They are already in your corner. And so then today we are going to be talking about community-centric practices, or how do you expand beyond your target demographic, and what are those practices to really ensure that you're reaching a broad base of supporters and communities that maybe might not necessarily be what you think are your demographic. So let you go to the next slide there. And so there's 10 principles of community-centric fundraising. I'm not going to go into to a lot of detail on each one of these. You can actually, I think it's community-centric fundraising, or ccf.org, goes very much into all of these principles, but I do want to talk about them. So that fundraising must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice, including making sure that all of your fundraising activities are inclusive. And what we will do in this session is really go through some of those tips and ideas for ensuring that you are adhering to your values of community-centric practices. That the individual missions are not as important as the collective community, meaning when it's kind of that idea of all boats rise together. And it's not just about ensuring that your nonprofit is successful, but that you are part of a community, and that as you are successful, the community is successful as well. Nonprofits are generous with and mutually supportive of one another. So often there is that, dog eat dog type of atmosphere in nonprofits. What is that saying? You put crabs in a barrel and they'll keep pulling each other down as one tries to escape. And you don't want that. And it's very true, there is more than enough money to go around. I know it doesn't feel like that often, but there is more than enough money to go around. You don't have to constantly have that clawing, grabbing, competitiveness for funds. What you need to do is focus on what makes you special, and the funds will be there for your particular for your speciality, right? And then all elements that strengthen the community are equally valued and appreciated. This is really important to eliminate that kind of saviorism that we have seen in the past with many nonprofits of, oh gosh, if it wasn't for us coming in, this community would be lost. Well, not necessarily. Communities from all across the spectrum thrive and survive, not because of outside influences, but because there are inherent in each community brilliance in each community. And sometimes it's good for nonprofits to source that out before coming in thinking they have all the answers and all the solutions. Time is valued equally as money. This is very important as well. Oftentimes as nonprofits, we're going after those big donors, those major donors, but an individual who's willing to donate some time, to volunteer, to maybe help you source out some funding can sometimes be a greater asset than just someone writing a big check. Unless you just have really deep pockets and can hire a lot of staff, those volunteers and that free help can be sometimes the difference, especially in a fundraising campaign. So time, and I always say that time is actually more valuable than money. You can always make more money, but you can never make more time. We respect our donors' integrity and treat donors as partners, which means occasionally pushing back. Now, this is one of those things that I find that many nonprofits have been very reticent to do. It's like to say no, we don't want your funding, or because there's too many strings attached to it, right? And in recent news, if you've been following the news recently, I really admire Harvard, who, as federal funding has been cut in Harvard's, unless they eliminated certain programs or eliminated how they did certain things. And Harvard's like, no, we're not doing that. We value what we're doing, and go ahead and cut your funding. We'll, don't need you, wouldn't want to be you. And so I appreciate that. That can be difficult to say, to push back when funding is restricted, or when the when the requirements to take on that funding can be so burdensome, and to say, no, thanks, but we're not going to take that grant. Very difficult place to be, especially when you really need money. And then we foster a sense of fundraising. Or excuse me, we foster a sense of belonging in our fundraising work, and we avoid treating anyone as the other. This is something that I always talk to my clients a lot, is that when you are reaching out to your support base, you want to make them feel like they are part of the work, not that they are funding your work, but that you are all in it together, and that you need them to further the work and further the mission and further the vision, right? That they are part of the work, not that it's you doing all the good and they're just there to, fund it or to give you money. We believe and encourage we believe and we encourage donors to believe that we all benefit from this work. Again, it's about raising the whatever it is, the community, the neighborhood, the city, the state, the country, whatever it is. We all benefit when you succeed, and you definitely want to carry through that attitude in your fundraising. And that we believe and encourage donors to believe that the work is holistic, not a collection of isolated segments. Again, you want to think of your nonprofit, and again, when you are in it, and you have your organization, and I totally understand. I know I'm speaking nonprofits. I understand that there are some farmers markets who are not 501c3. I get that. Understand, I'm using nonprofit in the very general sense, right? But that it's holistic, meaning that you don't have all the solutions to all the problems, that you are part of an ecosystem, an important part. And sometimes it's important to understand who else has a part in that ecosystem. So with farmers markets, who are obviously in food production, providing food, and that type of thing, there's probably a lot of other organizations that also are in that same ecosystem. Everybody has a part to play. And then the last principle is recognizing that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice. And that's just, it's one of those, it's like the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? That um, there is an element that if you are solid in your values, of inclusion and bringing along the community, that as you prosper, the community will prosper. As the community prospers, the city prospers. As the city prospers, the state prospers, and so on and so on and so on. So as I said, that website, CCF, community-centric-fundraising.org, has so much more into it if you want to delve deeper into each of those principles. But now we're just going to talk about some of the ways specifically that you can apply these principles. But first, let's talk about the next slide here of what is donor centric versus community centric, because sometimes those terms can be a little confusing. So donor centric has been in the past, right, where the donor was the center of everything, right? And that they were considered the expert on whatever the problem was, that the donor was the expert. They were the hero, they were the savior, because they were coming to fund it. And then, of course, if you had a special event, well, you're going to highlight those donors, right, who were giving you all that money, because they are the heroes, right? And when you're focused on donors, then your focus is always money is the answer. Well, as you know, money is not always the answer. And then the other thing about being donor centric, which has traditional nonprofit, is that support is considered like a favor, like the donors are giving you a favor by giving you their money. And when community centric, what it takes the focus off of the individual donor and puts it where it should be, on the community, so that the community is the center of the story, right? The experts are inside that community, right? They are not the expertise to solve the problem is not found outside of the community. It's actually found inside the community. So if organizations aren't consulting with members of the community, they can sometimes overlook what needs to work for that community. That uh, that there is a respect for that community, not a pity, not oh my gosh, they're so pathetic, we need to come in, or they're so poor, they need somebody like us with our expertise and our knowledge to come in, and because otherwise they would just be lost without us, right? No, communities don't need your pity. They need the respect, and all they want oftentimes is just a fair shot to get to improve their status, right, or whatever that situation is. So they want respect, not pity. The community has the solution, and support for an organization is not a favor. It's not a donor doing a favor, but more of that it should be your duty. Because if you have been given a lot, then there is more expected of you to give back. There's also the sense that especially, which is really seen in this country, particularly where the bulk of the wealth of America, I don't even want to say of America, it's almost the world, right, is in the hands of so few. The 1%, I believe, the recent statistic is hold 52% of all the wealth is in the hands of the 1%. And the thing about community centric, what it focuses on is they oftentimes got that money on the backs of underserved and minority communities and underprivileged and historically excluded communities who have no access to that wealth, but that were instrumental in creating that wealth for those very few who have it. So if you have that wealth, it's almost incumbent upon you to recognize that it wasn't just you, that there is a sense of your duty to try to give back and a more fair distribution. Now, I'm not talking necessarily, socialism, but I think there's more than enough money to go around, right? For you to still be a billionaire and give some money back. There's nothing that should stop you from that. So that's kind of the difference when we say community centric. Those are the kind of principles we talk about, making sure that the community stays at the center of your focus and not individual donors who can sometimes dangle their dollars as that carrot on the stick to kind of get you to jump through fire and jump through hoops just for that almighty dollar, right? Okay, so as we get into on the next slide, talking about so how do you become more community centric? The first thing you have to do is make sure you're not making excuses for not being community centric, right? And there's about 8 common excuses, and I just want to talk about those first, and then we'll just give you some tips about how you can be just even more proactive in um, in being community centric in your own fundraising. So the first thing is those excuses, we don't have the capacity. That is that limiting belief that in order to do good work, you need the time and the budget. But if you had the time and you had that budget, you could expand and you could reach out to new groups, right? If only, you had the budget. But without that, and that's not exactly true. There's a lot of things that you can do to still reach out. It's not always about budget that prevents. Oftentimes, what they say, where there's a will, there's a way. And volunteers can be great for this. And we'll talk a little bit about that, some of those free resources for reaching out. Our current supporters already meet our needs. So we don't need to reach out. We have what we need. This may have been in the past when maybe you got the big grant, and I still see it today. Organizations, especially if they had that big donor or had that big grant, they're like, we're set. We don't have to do anything else. Our current support is great. And that's all we need until the grant runs out or until that major donor decides that they're going to stop funding that organization. Now it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And so that belief that your existing donors, volunteers, and supporters are sufficient, what it does is that it eliminates the urgency to diversify because you're like, we're set, we got this, we don't need to do anything differently. And that is a very short-sighted way of looking at things, especially in the nonprofit industry, where you have to constantly be aware of the changing environment, particularly as it relates to funding. And then people outside our community won't care. I get this a lot. I work with a lot of different organizations. And when I'm always talking to them about expanding, they're like, well, people in that area or people in that geographic location would not be interested in what we're doing here. And how do you know unless you reach out, right? And that is a misnomer to think that, say, for example, I live in Seattle, to think that people on, in Idaho or people in Oregon would not be interested in what is happening in Seattle because they're so narrowly focused that they're only concerned about what happens in their backyard. That's just not true. Givers are oftentimes very generous and are more concerned about causes. And wherever that cause is being addressed, you've got their attention. It doesn't matter if that cause is just happening in their back door or in the next city or in the next state or across the country, right? And so that idea that keeps you very small is that anybody outside of our designated targeted community would not care about what we are doing, so we are not going to reach out, right? Bad assumption to make. Or it's too difficult to explain what we do to outsiders. Now, this might not pertain to a farmer's market. We kind of the explanations in the name farmers market, right? But oftentimes what you need to do as a farmers market is talk more about the importance of farmers markets. For most people, they're like, oh, farmers markets, you get fresher produce if you go to a farmers market. Well, why do you get fresher produce? Why is it important? Because is it healthier because it comes directly from the farmer to the stall? You sometimes need to have a little bit more explanation and trust that people will understand, right? Don't You should always incorporate a little bit of education about why you do and why it's important that you do what you do in your marketing. Don't assume that people who aren't involved in that specific area or who are not involved in farmers markets, it's like, why should we explain it to them? They won't understand it. They actually might. And so it really helps you also if you incorporate that bit of education to broaden your base, is to ensure that you have kind of an education arm in that as well. And then the excuses are the next slide there. Um, is we've tried this before and it didn't work. Oh man, do I get this all the time. Oh, that won't work. We tried that before. Oftentimes with an organization, there's never one thing that you do that fixes it all, right? Oftentimes it's a combination of things. And so just because something didn't work before, it's not, don't throw everything out. Maybe you just need to revamp the combination of interventions or the combination of solutions for something that works. Usually it's not just trying one thing and expecting transformation or impact, right? And so don't give into that, this won't work, we've already did it. The other thing about that excuse, we've tried it before, is recognizing that the times change. Maybe something that you tried 5 years ago, maybe now is the absolute opportune time to try it again, right? Because things change, people's perceptions change, society changes, the economy changes, economic environments change. And so what worked in the past might just work today. And so don't get into that. Yeah, that's not going to work, let's not do that. Diversifying would make things political. The fear of engaging with topics or partnerships perceived as controversial. Now, this may or may not appeal to a farmer's market, but I think in real sense it does. In this particular administration, I think you're all aware that this particular administration is really clamping down on DEI, which they feel is discriminatory. And if you understand what inclusion is all about, you understand that it is not discriminatory. It just creates a level playing field for everyone. And why shouldn't there be a level playing field for everyone? But I find really now, and especially in this political atmosphere we're in, that people are like, oh, well, I don't want to say this and I don't want to do that because I don't want to get the feedback or that negative feedback. Well, what you have to do, especially with any organization, especially if you have a mission that you believe is valuable, is you have to be able to stand for your values, right? So your values are um, immutable, meaning your values should not change. If you had values that were, yesterday, you should have the exact same values today. You don't, they shouldn't, you should be waffling on your values. So what's important to you, stand for those regardless, because there will always be people who support you and stand with you. So you don't have to fear about being controversial or that you will lose support. There are organizations, obviously farmers markets aren't that controversial, right? But I've worked with organizations and what they're working with can be very controversial and they may actually lose support. But the thing is that you will also gain support by people who think and believe and perceive like you do and who value what you value. So don't be afraid of that. We don't want to seem opportunistic. I face this all the time, especially when I'm talking about funding and about how to find a prospect for high net wealth individuals or major donors. I find that many nonprofits are reticent to prospect for high net wealth individuals because they don't want to seem like they are just going that they don't want it to seem inauthentic. They don't want to seem that they're concerned for targeting an affluent or different demographic may seem transactional or inauthentic. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but that comes into why engagement is so important. Yes, if the only time that community or that person hears from you is right before your fundraiser, that's going to come off as transactional and inauthentic. But if you continually engage with them and keep them a part of everything that you're doing and build that relationship around everything that you're doing and make them feel a part of everything that you're doing, then that comes across as authentic and not transactional or inauthentic. And we're grassroots. Big funders or outsiders won't get us. Yes, they will, because big funders and outsiders are just people, and so they will get you. So that's the belief that institutional donors and those from different backgrounds may not align with their values or methods. I find that people are more alike than not alike, and even different cultures and different ethnicities or different communities, there is common ground. And sometimes it's very important to identify what is that common ground and build on that. So those are the excuses. So let's get into what can we do to make sure that that our organization and our practices and our fundraising is community centric and focuses on keeping community at the heart. So the first thing you can be is proactive. This is very, very important. There is, I say there's no field of dreams approach, meaning, I know I'm really dating myself if I make this movie reference, but anyway, in the movie Field of Dreams, he was encouraged to build this baseball diamond, and he's like, well, if I build this baseball diamond in the middle of this cornfield, nobody would ever know about it. And James Earl Jones says, if you build it, they will come, and they did, right? Well, that works in the movies, but not necessarily in nonprofits. Just because you have an amazing organization, don't think that people will just somehow magically find out about it and flock to it. You need to be proactive in reaching out to people, even beyond your own community. It's not that there is no field of dreams, right? Where it's like, oh, we're just amazing and people will just somehow know how amazing we are and they will just support us and the funding will just come rolling in the mail, right? The checks will just become rolling in. That just doesn't work like that. So be very proactive and strategizing in your outreach. And then be prepared to overcome historical trust and or animosity. Now, this comes with, for every nonprofit, your success is dependent on continually reaching new donors, new supporters to support what you do. Continually. The reason you have to do that continually is that people's interests change, right? So if you say, "Oh, well, we've got 3,000 solid supporters," if you don't add to that, eventually that will be whittled down to, about 500 supporters, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because there's so many things that takes people's attention that if you are not continually adding, there's a natural attrition to any donor base, which I believe is very high, right about 15 to 20% a year. Meaning if you're not continually adding to your support base, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And ultimately it'll just flatline. So as you are reaching out, ultimately you may find that you have to reach out to communities that you may think, "Oh gosh, we've never really reached out to this particular community. They're a community that maybe you think has different values, or maybe they're a community that's not the same racial profile as you, or the same ethnic background, or the same culture as you." And you're thinking, "Oh, we don't know if we can reach out to them." Well, yes, you can, but understand that yes, there may be some historical trust issues. For example, if you are a predominantly white organization trying to reach a predominantly Black community, there may be some trust issues there about, what do you want from us? Why are you here? What's your real motive? And that's just because of history, but that doesn't mean you can overcome it. Again, that's what engagement is all about. Engagement with a community ensures that it builds the trust in your organization. And that's what you want, because you want everybody to support you, right? And so don't let that initial maybe animosity, or that initial mistrust, or initial kind of hurdle sometimes deter you from reaching out to new demographics and new communities, right? Because the continual engagement will prove your trust. And then expect to be in it for the long haul. Again, this is where, organizations like, well, we don't just want to seem performative, right? We don't want to just, go after this community because we need their money, because we do, but we don't want them to feel like we're just after their money. Well, that means you have to be in it for the long haul. If you only engage with the community, again, right before your fundraiser, then after your fundraiser, it's like crickets. They never hear from you again. That's very performative. And yes, that comes across as they don't care about us. They were only interested in what we could do for them, not what they could do for us, or not trying to create any win-win scenario. So expect to that as you reach out to new demographics, it becomes part of your strategy that you will continue as part of your engagement strategy over the long haul, right? As long as you are there. So, and then the next thing about after being proactive, the next slide, Amanda, is representation matters. Yes. So you want to look at your organization, and I always say, is there a pipeline from the community into your organization? Oftentimes, that is why there's oftentimes a disconnect between these organizations who can't relate to a particular community, because they have nobody representing that community who even works for them, right? So I always say it's always a great thing to have some type of pipeline of leaders directly from the community into your organization. So think about that. What does that look like? I don't know. You might want to think about it. Maybe it's coming up from, having a more open source volunteer program or something, or a management trainee program. I don't know. But having that representation is of an organization, obviously, is what gives you credibility and legitimacy with certain communities as well. Diversify your fundraising staff. It is, as much as nonprofits claim to be, oh, we're all about inclusion, and we're all about belonging, and then you go to their fundraising event, and oh my gosh, I'm like, where is the diversity? And they're like, well, we invited them, they just didn't come. One of the reasons why why that division, that diversity is eliminated right at the fundraising, and you can really see it at a fundraising event, is because mostly fundraising staff is a very predominant from predominant culture. So as a result, all of their outreach is also to that same culture. And so if you diversify your fundraising staff, you will automatically diversify your events and your whole fundraising strategies, because different people will relate to different staff, right? So different staff can have a better context with different communities or different cultures, right? And so a more diverse fundraising staff is key. And oftentimes I find that specifically in fund development, nonprofit fund development is unfortunately a very, very white field. And so you can start there and just diversify your fundraising staff. When it comes to major donors, this is one of the things also that people say, well, we're trying to prospect for major donors, and so naturally we're going after white people. And I'm like, really? Do you know in this state, especially, I'd say in the Pacific Northwest, there is so much money, especially when I talk about here in Seattle, because we have we're considered like Silicon Valley North, right? With all the tech money that's up here, there's a lot of money here, a lot of money in a lot of different cultures. And just because you might not be aware of it is not to say that there aren't rich Hispanics and rich Blacks and rich Asians and rich Native Americans, right? They are out there, but you might not be networking with them. They're not connected to you. So just because they're not connected to you does not mean they don't exist. So oftentimes you want to, again, this comes with engagement of being able to engage with communities so that you become more aware, especially when it comes to major donors, as I find that there's almost that sense of, oh, well, why would we look in the for a major donor in the Native American community because they don't have any money? Where does that come from, right? That is a perception, and it's a very false perception that can possibly impact your fundraising success. And then again, talked about this fundraising events. Make sure there's inclusivity in your fundraising events. Oftentimes, again, I kind of talked earlier talking about being donor centric. That sometimes the fundraising event is all about celebrating the donors, those big donors, instead of celebrating the community that is being impacted. I gave an example one time to an organization. They were having their fundraiser and they were trying to get all these major corporations to buy a table at their fundraiser event. And what happens typically is that a corporation, say a Boeing, will buy a table at this event. And then on the night of the event, Boeing will, I don't know, send an email around and say, hey, we have a table at such and such gala. Got 10 tickets. Anybody want to go? Not that those 10 people are passionate about that cause, but there's free tickets and a free dinner. So, first come, first serve. But would be better if those corporations bought a table and then the organization said, we are going to fill that table with people who might not be able to afford a ticket because these are this community that we serve, right? So really thinking about how to add inclusivity into your fundraising events so that they don't you don't have that so they can remain very inclusive. Okay, the next tip about that you could do is partner with cultural organizations. As a farmer's market, this is a great idea, and you may already do some of this, but many cultural organizations, and they are everywhere and represent every culture that's out there. Every culture has their own unique food palette, right? And you are a market. Oh my gosh, you could just expand your base by supplying food stuff from certain cultures so that you can encourage those certain cultures to come to your market because they might not be able to find this particular food stuff at, at the grocery store or whatever, right? But as a farmer's market, there's an opportunity there to really be able to engage with other organizations. So maybe you partner with them. You should demonstrate your support and your visibility for these different cultures. Maybe that's attending their community events, right? To get your name out there. We're part of the community, you're part of the community. So why, maybe having maybe you could set up a little booth at their community event, the cultural festival or the community parade, whatever it is, or that community gathering. But again, gets back to that field of dreams. Don't expect everybody to have to come to you, right? Sometimes you have to get out and be proactive in getting out and going to other communities, because that shows how important that interaction is to you, that you made the effort to get out and reach out proactively. Okay, then the next slide, please. Yes, and then there might be that collaboration on joint projects or initiatives. Again, um, what those projects are could, I don't know what those might be for a farmer's market, but sometimes it's a matter of being creative, and maybe it's a brainstorming thing, right? Maybe what you could do, I mean, many communities and cultural organizations have events, and oftentimes their events are focused around celebrating with food. Here in, I don't know what's happening in Oregon, but I can speak what's happening here in Seattle. So there's a couple of organizations. There is one every summer. There's a Africa Week, and they celebrate a lot of the different African communities that are located in this area, and it's a big celebration that they have. And part of that is being to celebrate with their native dishes, right? And so, gosh, if you were a farmer's market, being able to sponsor that event, maybe supplying or helping to supply some of the food stock that they will need to prepare for those cultural events, something like that. I don't know, but think about what that might be, because there's so many, every culture out there has their own culture organization, whether you are aware of it or not. You might not be aware because you might not be a part of that culture, but I promise you that there's a rich diversity of cultures and who all have their own organization. There are multicultural chambers of commerce, right? You may be a part of the local chamber of commerce, but there's other chambers of commerce that you could be involved with as well. Again, to network, to get to know who else is, how do we reach out? How do we form some connections outside of our target demographic? There are immigrant serving nonprofits, and that is their mission and vision, to serve a particular immigrant community, right? Maybe there are projects that you could collaborate with them on, and or different cultural associations. Another thing is if offering your space or social media platforms to culturally specific celebrations or events. Obviously, as a farmer's market, you might not own that space to actually be able to share that space, but your social media platform, oh my gosh, right? Who gets a shout out on your social media platform? Social media can be a very powerful tool, and if you have a wide distribution, sharing that distribution with a specific organization could really help them as well. And it could really be a very positive collaboration there. So thinking about those collaborations or joint initiatives could be key. Um, and somebody had just asked the question, will there be breakouts? Yes, we are. We have probably just a couple more slides, and then we will have a breakout session. And then the other thing you can do is translate marketing and communications. This is another thing, right? Is you put out social media, or maybe you have newsletters or emails. Are they in different languages, or do you only have them in English? If so, then that means only an English-speaking community is most likely going to read that information. But if you want to target other cultures and other communities, think about having your marketing and communications translated into other languages, right? So if you have a flyer or something on your website or outreach materials, right? And also think about the different ethnic media. Again, if you are, this is one of those things that unless you're a part of a specific culture, you might not be aware that each culture and each community has its own news source where that community feels very comfortable and that this is a trusted source of news and information. It might be a community newspaper that services only Native Americans. It might be, only it might be a radio station that only serves, the Hispanic community, right? And so you might not be aware of it unless you are part of those communities. But you should think about advertising or promoting what you do and who you are in those ethnic media sources. So that is a key way of reaching out and other demographics being aware of who you are and what you do. And the next slide. Okay, and then build relationships with faith-based institutions. Um, what I love about faith-based institutions is that almost every faith on the surface of the planet believes in giving and giving back. It's an amazing thing about faith. And so if you want to surround yourself with a bunch of givers, it's build relationships with faith-based institutions that demonstrates a mutual respect and trust. And yes, obviously, if you are part of that faith, yes, that is obviously an easy in, right? But that's not to say that you don't have to be a part of that faith. You can support, I mean, most, I can't speak for every faith, speak for churches, have a service bulletin where they're taking advertisements, to help, paid advertisements to help raise some money for that institution. And there is no reason why you couldn't, put advertisement in a bulletin, or you might even partner in there if they have some type of a mission program. For example, many faith-based institutions oftentimes have a food pantry, right? For either congregation or neighborhood community members who don't have food, and they might have that as a farmer's market. That would be a great, you might be the partner in their mission program to providing the food or something like that, or some other type of program they might have. All faith-based, just about all faith-based institutions have some type of conference or event where they're bringing all their congregants and all of their all of the faithful together for something, some big event, some big celebration. Perhaps you could have a vendor kiosk at that to, as a way of getting information out about your farmers market. And what that shows is not just that you gave out information, but what it shows is that you respect that organization and that you are a part of that that community, and that you respect that community. And that goes a long way, especially when you're looking for donations. Okay, and then the next one, I think we just have a couple more before we break out. The other thing you can do is use community ambassadors. And people are like, well, how do we get to that community? Or we don't know anybody. This is a great thing to just train up some and equip some community liaisons. This is volunteers, basically, but who are representative of those communities that you're trying to reach out to. And that, you equip them with with your story, how to tell your story, how to, in an inspiring way, your compelling storytelling. And they are already part of these communities, so they can be that ambassador to talk up and to outreach to those specific communities. And so with that, you want to ensure that there's that representation, that there's that they have ambassadors from different backgrounds, because what they can do is open up new networks for you to, again, the idea is you need an ever increasing and ever expanding support base. The bigger that is, the more successful you will be as an organization. Plus, having those ambassadors is a great way to help build some bridges for that community. And the next slide. And then as an organization, you can join equity coalitions, and advocacy groups, networks. And again, these are groups that are, expressing a commitment to shared values and or connects you to a variety of racial and ethnic organizations, right? Again, just thinking of ways, these are just different tips and different ways that you can reach out to other organizations. But since there are already coalitions and networks um, already formed, it might be just a way of you joining to be a part of that. And then the last slide we have before we go to breakout is that you can celebrate cultural heritage months. Every culture has a heritage month. I mean, there's actually, there's some month for everything, right? And so whether it's Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, Native American Heritage Month, whatever it is, celebrate that, because that puts you on the radar of those communities that you may be trying to reach. And they will be more likely to then shop at your market, or to talk about your market, to talk up your market, and to recommend your market. Again, it shows that you have shared values, right? And again, it's about being thoughtful versus performative. So for example, I saw something, I can't think of what it was. I think it was, I honestly can't think of who the vendor was, but it was something, I'm going to make up something, but it's something really silly, like, to celebrate Black History Month, we're offering 50% off, a new Black and Decker drill. What does the Black and Decker drill have to do with Black History Month, right? That's just a very performative, nonsensical way of trying to connect Black History Month. But it may be what it is. You have a farmer's market. Maybe during Hispanic Heritage Month, we bring in maybe one of the, do a cooking demonstration of the Hispanic cultural foods or something in your store, and then as people come by, they can taste it, and then you can obviously sell the produce to those people, something like that. I don't know what it might be, but you want it to be thoughtful, not just performative, right? And again, it just shows, acknowledges, respect, and honors those communities. If you want those communities to engage, if you want to engage with those communities, it is about, you need to show that you honor and respect them. It kind of goes back to some broken bridges, some burnt bridges, historical bridges, and it's about how do we kind of mend those bridges. And so honoring, respecting, acknowledging some communities is kind of the first step to that. So I know we're just about to break out into breakout groups. You can stop sharing right there, because I know I kept seeing some questions pop through. I just want to make sure that we get to, I obviously can't see them all right now, but so just
Yeah,
very
there
quick.
was, Pamela, there was a couple of questions or conversation starting in the chat about a lot of markets have a policy of not accepting faith-based booths at their market. And I think there's a little rethinking that based on what you're saying. And I don't know
Yeah.
if Bill or Melissa might want to say something more about that, or
Yeah, why don't you? Because I could understand, because then it's like you don't want to, my only thinking would be like, because you don't want to say that we are promoting any one particular faith, right? And so then it's about, well, then open it up to all faiths, right? But tell me kind of what is your thinking behind that?
Well, this is Bill. First of all, when we started and we formed our market, that was basically the same as most market policies that we looked at. So we accepted that into our policies as we were making up a policy. The other thing is most people are really worried about being intimidated, being harassed somewhat by people at faith groups and sometimes, and that could discourage farmers or market goers and turn them off and maybe not come to the market. And of course, our object is to get people to the market. So it's just a safety valve there to say, look, we don't need any problems that might come down the pike should we allow them to come in. So I
That's
think that was a lot of the thinking behind that. And we
okay.
also have the same policy for political parties and organizations, same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so yeah, so I can respect that. You do what you feel is right. I will kind of go back to again, that opening it up for everybody, and one of the things that you said, because we don't want any problems, so you're kind of assuming that there would be problems, right? And sometimes part of what engagement does is learning from your community what would be a problem. So before you make a decision because you think it will be a problem, maybe get some feedback, and maybe you already have, and maybe that's where this came from. But yeah, but it's it's not that you have to do all of these things, but these are just ideas for things to think about of how to expand and how to reach out to new communities. But I can certainly respect that, again, it's like um, if you don't want to separate people, don't talk about religion and politics, right? Don't want to
Right.
argue it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Melissa from the Coos Bay Market, and that's kind of the same thing as us. It's wrapped in with our no political, no religion, and
Gotcha.
that was set 25 years ago. 2 years ago, I think it is, we re-looked at it, and the city, who we're on city streets and all that, and we have meetings with them because they're a big supporter of us, and they don't want that changed.
Okay. Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, if they say
That's
if you
interesting
have
to know.
political or something, you can't have the market, they won't give us our permit. That's kind of a big thing.
Yeah, and we're on the city streets too. We're in the same boat.
Okay. Okay. Yes. I would obviously I'll defer to your expertise on that, right? Any other questions before we get into breakouts? You can just pop up. I can't see them all in the chat, but if you had a question, you can raise your hand, or anybody. Okay. Well, why don't we go into the breakouts then? And what we're going to do is put you in groups. And the question that I want you to talk about, we're just going to give you like about 10 minutes in the breakout, is what are some of the ideas? I just want you to talk amongst yourselves about what are some of those ideas that you are doing to reach a new demographic, right? Or to expand your support base. And because sometimes why I want you to have this conversation is because sometimes what somebody else does can maybe spark something in you. So I just want to have that conversation. So we're just going to put you into breakout groups for about 5 minutes to discuss that. What are some specific things that you have done to outreach to reach a new demographic, or reach a new to expand your support base? Maybe I'll write that question and I'll put it in the chat just so you have that.
Oh, looks like Kendra already put the question in the chat.
You're wonderful, Kendra. Can't even type that fast. Wonderful. Thank you.
And then I think we'll get to some breakout groups here in just a second.
Okay.
You all should be seeing a message on your screen now, but joining a breakout room, let us know if you're not seeing that.
Yeah, because you might have to physically click join to actually get into the room once you've been assigned a room.
Helena, did you want to join a breakout room? And Jamie, I see that you just joined us. You just joined us just as we're about to go into breakout rooms. Do you want to join one? Okay, looks like they did join one. Maybe
Okay.
let us know if you're having any trouble, or if you're just wanting to hang out and not go to a room, that's okay.
Okay. So I think we had initially said, see, so if they do 10, oh yeah, so if they do 10 minutes, so it will come back. We'll do like come back or close the rooms like at 1:50.
Let's see, yeah. 45 seconds and the breakout rooms will close and they'll be back.
Perfect. The slide deck that I got, I'll email you later.
Okay.
Okay, see. I'm not sure if everybody's back in the room. Great. I would just like to hear just a little feedback on what you guys talked about. What are some of those ideas? I think because sometimes I think it's just so important to have this conversation, because oftentimes how do we do our outreach, or where do we go, or who do we talk to? Sometimes a good brainstorming session is always a good idea. So I just kind of want to hear back from each of the groups about what are some of the ideas, or what are some things that you specifically are doing to expand your support base or outreach to a new community. Adam, you have your hand up?
Hey, Pamela. Yeah, Darcy and I had a chance to chat, and I think one of the kind of overall outreach / fundraising challenges that we deal with, I'm with the Hillsdale Farmers Market, is that we have a board, and I think general consensus around the board is that they're hesitant to do the fundraising and outreach, and I think they see it as like this very transactional exercise. And Darcy put up the good point of like, it's not necessarily about fundraising for the market, but just outreaching about the market. And she also mentioned this concept of like, as a farmer's market, we have somewhere where we can invite people to kind of see the impact that they have, or the work that we do, or like the opportunities. We can like showcase the opportunities that we have in the market by just inviting folks to the market. So maybe it's changing the communication that us as staff have with the board, and that changing the board's kind of vocabulary around like, it's not about necessarily like fundraising is kind of the end of that journey, but like the beginning of the journey is outreach to the community about just education of the farmers market, and trying to get people to the farmers market just to experience it for themselves if they haven't been. And I thought that was a good kind of change of vocabulary, because the fundraising word is very scary to a lot of people, because people think it's this very cringe thing of asking people for money, when it doesn't necessarily like that. I mean, that's part of what it is, but if you don't position it that way, or if that's kind of the end aspect of it, and it's a longer term kind of relationship building, it's a little easier for folks to digest and get comfortable with, I think.
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. There is a very specific reason why I call myself a fund development consultant, not a fundraising consultant. Fundraising can be very transactional. As I ask you for money, you give me money. I sell you something, you give me money. Where fund development is all about creating an environment for fundraising to happen. Right. And that's where the board can come in. It really is about when the board's role in fundraising really is networking, creating those relationships, creating that environment, so that when it comes time to ask for money, you have the support base there, right? But it's not necessarily, asking for the money. It's not making the ask. It's creating the environment for the ask to happen. And so, excellent. I love that. Anything else? Another group. I can't, how many, do you know how many groups we had?
There were 3 groups.
3 groups. Okay. Another group. Would you like to share?
Oh, Melissa and I, this is Bill.
Yes.
We're together and we discussed what we're doing. She's actually doing more than we are as far as reaching out to a demographic that she has, the Native American demographic. And I know she can jump at any time here, but basically, some of that was reaching out with uh, kinds of incentives, such as double up bucks or something like that, for people, and she can probably explain that in more detail than I can, but how they approach it. But a lot of the tribal members were not really too excited about that. She said because of the SNAP program, they didn't understand how it would work, and they were real concerned about accepting money, et cetera, whatever financial assistance, I guess.
Mhm.
And there she is. So,
Yeah. So what it is we did a combination. So for 3 years, there was a gal, well, 2 years, there was a gal and I that got together and we're like, we have these people that we need to help. So the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, Salusa Indians, Nicole and I got together and we're like, okay, let's put a program together. So we kind of took a couple different things. We took kind of the stuff from Double Up Food Bucks, and we kind of took the stuff from the senior checks. So how it works is the tribe actually does the coupons and gives it to their tribe members. The tribe members come and use them here at the market. They give them to the vendors. They have very specific things. They give them to the vendors. The vendors turn them into us. Then we turn around and give a check and cut the check.
Okay.
Last year we gave approximately $7,000 because the program worked so well that we are giving out approximately $23,000 this
Wow.
year is our budget difference. And part of the reason why we did this too is there are a lot of elders and some Native Americans that don't trust like the SNAP programs because it's government. We don't want to do
Yeah.
this and we don't want to
Yeah.
be involved with that.
Right.
But when they came to the market with these coupons from their own tribe and saw the other programs that we had, the SNAP, the Double Up Food Bucks, when Oregon State Extension is here, we have coupons that we give out for that. They kind of realized that we weren't this big, scary governmental thing.
Mhm.
And so we do know that a lot of those have signed up for regular senior checks,
Yeah.
or some have signed up for SNAP. So it's very interesting. Plus, like I said, it was a try it last year to see how it worked. Because it worked so well, some of the other tribes had reached out to Nicole and said, how do you do this program? And they're looking at starting the programs as well. I believe there's 2 up in the Portland area and 1 in the Eugene area that is possibly looking at doing it. I don't know if they'll do it this year or not, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And part of, I always talk about engagement as well, because part of what engagement is, the more you engage with a particular community, the more you learn about what will work, right? So you're not just like, we can try this. And I don't know, I'm not saying that all you did was just sit in your back office and come up with an idea, maybe, but part of engagement is finding out what will a community accept, what works for them. That's part of engagement, learning more about who the community is, and getting a sense of, gosh, if we do this, will it work? So sometimes, whether it's you can do that in a lot of different ways. Listening sessions or
Well, and
quick
also
surveys, that.
what I've noticed too is once we started doing this, I have 4, always had 1, but I now have the 4 or 5 Native American vendors that we haven't had in the past.
Yes, right.
So they're
Yes,
feeling comfortable. They're coming down. They're like, oh, I can do
yes.
this kind of thing. It's starting out really slow, but I
Uh-huh.
think it's going to be good.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I love that idea. Love it. And then the last group, you want to share some of your ideas or what you talked about?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Eileen. Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know if Barbara or Etsy wants to talk. We just talked about in communities where you have limited diversity reaching out, a couple of things we've done in the DAOs is we now have our flyers printed in Spanish and English on both sides, and in Spanish in more, colloquial Spanish versus, what we learned in high school kind of Spanish.
Okay.
We are seeing more Hispanics. We also have kind of partnered with WIC, who come and pass out their farmers market vouchers at the market. And then because we take the Oregon Trail card and then have a snap match as well as the double up food box, that have brought in more younger families. And we have a Power of Produce program for the kids. So it's brought in, lowered our demographics a little bit, more families than, that average, 47-year-old white woman that comes. And we have also, it's kind of cute, we have a lot of grandparents that will bring their kids as a day because of the Power of Produce program and an outing for them. And especially maybe people that are using their Oregon Trail card because it can be an experience and they can shop together.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So you have a grandparents' day at the market? Did I hear that correctly?
No, we just have grandparents that a
Oh,
lot of times come with their grandkids.
gotcha. Wonderful, wonderful. I love it. But yes, so like I say, there's no right or wrong way to do to outreach to a new community. The main thing I hope you get is to be proactive in doing something though, right? Again, not the field of dreams approach, right? That somehow they'll just magically find you and want to come. And as as Melissa had said, which I also, she reiterated, which I also had mentioned, is oftentimes there's a mistrust just from past history and maybe a discomfort and not sure if if they can trust you. So there is that kind of breaking through that barrier first. But I totally agree with you, Melissa. I think that program you have will really take off now, especially like I say, now that you actually have Native American vendors at your market. I think that just will open up the door, right? Because but that initial, kind of a getting over that little hurdle of can we trust you? Who are you? What do you want? What's your real motive here? A lot of that, you have to kind of get past that. But you do, right? It's,
and I think too, part of it is just realizing that it's going to take time. Like it's not going to be overnight that this is going to happen. I mean, last year was the first year we put it in play, but it took 2 years of making sure we were doing everything, going to the elders saying, we really want to try this, getting them to have confidence in us that we were going to treat it correctly.
Right.
Part of it with them is there's certain things that are totally off limits, like you cannot have. And one question that came to us was in the past, I think 5 years ago, we had a winery that was here. In order to have the Native American program, you cannot have any alcohol at all in the market.
Yes.
That was a big sticking point.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So very interesting. But so, we have like 2 minutes left. Thank you so much for your comments and your feedback. As always, I just love to engage with organizations and hear things. We have about a minute and a half left. Any last questions on anything before we go? I know, I think put in the chat there. Do we have? Oh my gosh, I always forgot to put the you have the link there. Please give your feedback on what you thought about this webinar and other series. There's a quick little survey that you can take there. Would really appreciate your feedback. And we'll make sure that you get a copy of the slide deck that will get you all that as well with the recording. So thanks so much, everybody, for your time. Really appreciate it. I'm sorry, Bill, did you have a question?
I was just going to say thank you for the presentation and thank you for this because this is just wrapping this up, if I understand right.
Yes, it is. This was the last one of a 4-part series.
So thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Okay, great, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. We'll see you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.